The Friday mailbag is back with a question you might have heard before. Is Notre Dame going to join a conference, maybe at some point in the next 10 years? In today's episode, I'll explain why I think Notre Dame's independence is secure for now.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome into Locked On Irish. It is Friday, July 14th, so happy Friday to you. And thanks as always for making this your first listen of the day. If you're new to the program, you should know that you can watch every episode on YouTube, or if you're on the go and want to listen on the podcast, you can find it free and available on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, you name it. And if you like what you hear, I'd encourage you to please subscribe to the show. My name is Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and have been podcasting about the football team since 2020. I'm also a producer covering college football for Fox Sports, and I'm finally back in LA after being in Dallas all week for Big 12 Media Days. I don't have much to report out of Dallas that's super applicable to Notre Dame, but I did get to chat with Brady Quinn for a little bit on our Fox set. That was my first time meeting him, and he was great. He also has really high hopes for the Irish this year, so that was cool. Really, the main thing everyone wanted to talk about was conference expansion and the fact that it was Oklahoma and Texas's last time at Big 12 Media Days before they move to the SEC next season. And whenever conference expansion is brought up, Notre Dame is always the elephant in the room because they're clearly the biggest prize on the market, so to speak, if they ever choose to enter the market, that is. I'm going to be in Vegas next week for Pac-12 Media Day, and then I'll be in Indianapolis the following week for Big 10 Media Days. So I'm sure I'll continue to hear a lot more about conference expansion and Notre Dame's place and the whole thing over the course of these next few weeks. But that's where we're going to start with this week's mailbag. And remember, you can send in your questions throughout the week in the YouTube comments, on Twitter at Locked On Irish, or via the Instagram DMs at Locked On Irish Pod. But let's get to our first question because it's about the topic of conference expansion. So at Ticka Ganderson wants to know, will Notre Dame be in a conference 10 years from now? The simple answer is no. I don't think Notre Dame is going to join a conference at some point within the next 10 years, and I think they're going to be independent when we revisit this conversation in 2033. Because Notre Dame really needs three things to remain independent, and odds are, if you're listening to the podcast, you know what those three things are. The first thing, the most important thing for Notre Dame to remain independent is they need to have access and a realistic shot at making the college football playoff and therefore the national championship. With the new 12-team model that's going to start in 2024, Notre Dame will have access to the playoff every single year because there's going to be 6 at-large bids given out. Now, I know that Notre Dame is not going to have access to the first-round bye because those are given out. Those 4 spots are given to the 4 highest-ranked conference champions. I don't necessarily agree with this rule, but this is what Jack Swarbrick compromised with the playoff committee and the rules committee once they made this up. So even though I don't agree with it, it is what it is. Notre Dame is still going to have a shot to make the playoff as long as this 12-team playoff is in place. The second thing, Notre Dame needs a broadcast partner for its home football games, and that broadcast partner has to pay Notre Dame something in the range of what the schools in the Power 5 conferences, specifically the Big 10 and the SEC, make from their media rights deals. And it looks like Notre Dame is on the cusp of re-signing their deal with NBC, albeit much different numbers in that one, but it does look like that's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when at this point. And then the third thing, Notre Dame needs a conference for all their other sports, the Olympic sports. And right now, considering where the ACC is, with their media rights deal and sort of the binding agreement they have with all the schools in the conference, it's really hard for them to get out of it. And I feel like even if the ACC were to collapse in the near future, which I don't see happening at all, I think that's, even though that might have been something that was considered for a little bit, the ACC, they didn't look to be in great shape for a little bit. I think that Notre Dame's Olympic sports are going to be just fine for a while. So when you look at these three things, Notre Dame is going to have a path. They're going to have a broadcast partner. It's probably going to be NBC, and that's going to be figured out very soon. And they're going to have a conference for all the Olympic sports. Those are the three main things, and right now it looks like those are all very secure. So I think Notre Dame's independence is very secure in the immediate future. But independence is not a permanent state of affairs. As a matter of fact, we're probably going to revisit this conversation every year, especially when we're getting close to 2026, okay? Now, I understand like the easy counter to this would be like, who the hell knows? Because what college football was 10 years ago is so different than what it is today. I mean, just think about how different things were. 10 years ago, we still had the BCS. 2013 was actually the last year before the 14 playoff. 10 years ago, Notre Dame had just joined the ACC. Literally, that happened on July 1st, 2013. Missouri had just played their first season in the SEC, and they made the SEC championship led by their quarterback, Chase Daniels, who's now the ultimate journeyman backup quarterback, although he's made quite the bag doing it. And we were still 5 years away from the transfer portal even becoming a thing. So it was just a completely different world. So odds are, when we look ahead 10 years from now, college football is going to be much different than what it is today. So I think the bigger question here for Notre Dame is it going to make sense to be an independent 10 years from now? Because it does now, like for all the reasons I just mentioned, okay? So let's look back to 2013 again. That year, the Big Ten brought in $318 million in revenue during the 2013 fiscal year. Each school received around $23 to $26 million of that total, except Nebraska, which they didn't start receiving their full shares until like 2017, 2018. Fast forward to today. During the 2022 fiscal year, the Big Ten brought in $845.6 million and distributed around $58 to $60 million to its member schools. That's more than double what the conference was making in 2013. And back then, the $300+ million that they were bringing in, that was shattering all of the records, okay? And in just a few more years, those numbers are probably going to double again with the new media rights deal the Big Ten just signed, as well as the SEC, the one that they signed with ESPN. So according to the Action Network, the Big Ten schools will receive something close to what they got last year in 2023 and 2024, which is around like $60 million. But then it's going to jump to roughly $100 million annually starting in 2025. That is a shit ton of money. And that doesn't even include the revenue that they'll make from the college football playoff, bowl games, or the NCAA tournament in basketball. Notre Dame, meanwhile, is in the midst of negotiations with NBC for their new media deal. The highest number I've seen that Notre Dame might get is $75 million. That was reported by Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports a year ago. I think a more realistic number, the number I've seen thrown around the most, is closer to like $60 million a year. That's still a significant increase from the current deal, but in 2025, when this new deal with NBC would take place, even if Notre Dame were to get $60 million a year, that's going to be around $40 million less per year than every single school in the Big Ten and the SEC makes, something in that range. That's a lot, all right? And look, we all know the cost of being independent for Notre Dame isn't new. You know this. You're a smart Notre Dame fan. You're listening to this podcast. You understand that Notre Dame could be making more money from their media rights if they were a full-time member of the ACC, let alone the Big Ten. And this is like the most common misconception among the casual college football fans who bitch about Notre Dame not being in a conference. Like these people have no idea what they're talking about. If a person ever tells me that Notre Dame won't join a conference because of greed, it tells me everything I need to know about that person's college football intellect. I don't need to listen to them anymore because they just told on themselves. Because greed is not the reason why Notre Dame isn't joining a conference. They are willingly accepting less money by not joining a conference. Now, back in the BCS days when they could make $14.5 million a year when they made the BCS as opposed to other schools who had to share that revenue among the conference, that was a different time. Okay, that is not how it is today. All right, and there are even Notre Dame fans who say that the university and the athletic department chase the bag and nothing else, when that's just not true. Like this media deal and Notre Dame's past media deals with NBC, that's like a prime example of Notre Dame choosing to take less money. They have been and will continue to be comfortable in making a little bit less money from their media rights deal to remain independent. And there are obviously benefits to being independent that go beyond finances in the media deal. Like Notre Dame has the freedom to pick 7 other games on the schedule, something they really like. They don't have a choice with the 5 that are determined by the ACC, but that way they can maintain rivalries with USC, Navy, although I wish that one went away, Stanford, I don't really care about that one either. But you get my point here, okay? Notre Dame likes the ability to make their own schedule, and they can go around the country. They can play in all the big markets. They're playing in LA every single year. Some years they're in Chicago, some years they're not, but Notre Dame is close to Chicago, so they're always kind of in that market. They're able to get to New York a lot, so they're able to hit the biggest markets in the country, and they're able to lure those donors, those alums who live across the country in these big markets. When Notre Dame goes and plays those games, there's all kinds of events that take place that is basically just a great way to get all kinds of money being floated from them into the football program, the athletic department, and the university. So there are clearly benefits to being an independent. Plus, it's cool that Notre Dame is independent. It's one of the things that makes the program unique. It's one of the things that makes it stand alone in college football. And yes, I enjoy how upset it makes all the other college football fans that Notre Dame doesn't join a conference. Like that alone is pretty fun to me, okay? And I'm sure it is for a lot of you listening to this as well. So there's a lot of benefits to being independent, but there is still an opportunity cost by choosing to remain independent as opposed to joining a conference. And to me, This is where the next apparel deal comes into play. It seems like Notre Dame is about to re-up their deal with Under Armour. It's been reported by different outlets that that's certainly where they're leaning. Nothing is set in stone. I'm not reporting anything here, but it does seem like that's an inevitability, okay? And trust me, I don't love it. I would much rather see them go to Nike or Jordan, but financially, I've got to admit it makes sense based on some of the things that I've been hearing. I've heard from a couple reliable sources that Under Armour is offering 2 times the amount of money to Notre Dame than Nike or Jordan or some of those other apparel outlets. I can't think of many examples in business where turning down an offer that will make you double the amount of money over the next option is a good idea. Although I did kind of lay one out with Notre Dame's independence as opposed to joining a conference. Like I said, there's other ways for Notre Dame to make up that money. Now, part of the reason why Under Armour is offering 2 times the amount of money compared to these other apparel outlets is because they're desperate. Under Armour really needs Notre Dame to survive as a company. There's an argument to be made that Notre Dame could be engaging in a risky investment if Under Armour tanks in a few years, but I'm sure that's something the decision makers at Notre Dame are weighing heavily, and if they do choose to sign with Under Armour, they believe that the company will thrive again as partners. But my point here is that Notre Dame has to make up some of the money they're missing out on with the media rights deal to keep up with the Big Ten and the SEC, and this is not a small amount. We're talking $40 to $50 million per year, potentially even more down the line. The Under Armour deal, or really the apparel deal as a whole, is a perfect opportunity to do just that. If Nike or Jordan were offering the same amount as Under Armour, then this probably isn't even a discussion, but that's just not the case here. And I know fans don't want to go to Under Armour, and trust me, I don't either, but I also don't want Notre Dame to fall even more behind in the arms race of college football. We're all okay with the school taking less money and media rights in order to remain independent. That's fine, all right? But eventually, when you continue to choose the options that make you significantly less money in all of these deals, it's going to catch up to you. They've got to make up that money somehow, or else the gap between Notre Dame and the competition, especially the elite schools in the SEC and the Big Ten, it's going to get bigger and bigger every year unless they act on it, and nobody wants that. So let's look at 10 years from now. The playoff isn't getting any smaller, so they're definitely going to be at large bids for Notre Dame. They're going to have a path. So check that box. I also don't see a world where Notre Dame has trouble finding a home for their Olympic sport, so you can check that box too. The big one has to do with the broadcast partner, and the broadcast partner and the apparel deal sort of work in tandem here because they need to get to that number in order to keep up with the big-time schools, and those things are both happening as we speak, okay? Notre Dame is in negotiations with NBC, and whoever the next apparel deal is going to be, it's likely going to be Under Armour. Notre Dame is going to find a broadcast home for their home football team, and then I think in conjunction with the media deal and the apparel deal, Notre Dame is going to be making enough money annually through those 2 deals in order to keep up with the competition in college football. In that way, Notre Dame is going to be able to remain independent for the foreseeable future. Again, this could all change in a few years because college football is constantly changing. It's in a constant state of evolution, but I think eventually that's going to slow down a little bit, and I feel like Notre Dame's place as an independent is going to be secure. All right, coming up next, we've got some over-unders to discuss, including one about the amount of times Jordan Botelho will get called for roughing the passer this year, plus how Sam Hartman's situation at Notre Dame compares to what he had at Wake Forest. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle because every part needs to fit just right. So, the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, that's 122 million parts, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when you know the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. All right, thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Before we get to the rest of the mailbag questions, I'd like to remind you to like the video below and subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe, rate, and review if you're listening to the podcast. Okay, back to the questions. This one's actually not even a question. It's more of a statement. It comes from @YoungGraceHopper. I want to hear about Sam Hartman's transition from Wake to ND and how they compare. Thanks, LOL. Again, not really a question, but we will address it here, and I'll allow it. All right, so let's look at the obvious differences here for Sam Hartman at Wake Forest compared to Notre Dame. The national attention on Hartman is going to be much bigger this year than it ever was at Wake Forest. If he has another game like he did last year against Louisville when he had 5 turnovers, it's going to be a national storyline. It's going to be leading the college football shows. It's going to be the biggest deal in the entire sport, really. That cannot happen at Notre Dame. Whereas if that happens at Wake Forest, you kind of see it and you're like, wait, what? And then you sort of just move on. Okay? He's going to be playing on national television in prime time basically every other week throughout the season, and he's going to face off against the reigning Heisman Trophy winner and 2 of the biggest programs in the entire sport in Clemson and Ohio State. Plus, you look at it schematically, the offense Notre Dame runs is going to be much different than the slow mesh stuff that they run at Wake Forest. There will still be a lot of run-pass option, but not the delayed mesh point with the running back. The way he examines the defense pre-snap is probably going to be a little bit different. But fortunately for Hartman, he's going to be playing with a much better offensive line at Notre Dame, so he should have a lot more time in the pocket. Plus, Notre Dame should have a much better running game than he ever had at Wake Forest, so that's going to change how defenses key on him. They can't just look for the pass every single play. They're probably going to be a little bit more focused on the running backs, and then Sam Hartman is going to have opportunities to hit him deep. Okay, so the offense and the players around him, I think, in totality, will be better than what he had at Wake Forest. Although I will say, as for the guys he's throwing to at Notre Dame, we're going to have to wait and see because Wake Forest had some dudes, all right? Sam Hartman had A.T. Perry to throw to at Wake Forest, who finished with over 1,000 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns just last season. That dude's a stud, okay? And right now, even though I have high hopes for what Jayden Thomas can do at Notre Dame this season, what he did last year compared to A.T. Perry isn't even close. Now, granted, Jayden Thomas didn't really come on until like the second half of the year. Drew Pine throwing to him. I get it, all right? But A.T. Perry is better than any receiver on Notre Dame's roster today. It'll be interesting to see which receiver steps up. We've gone over that a lot in this podcast, but I'm not saying that's an automatic win at Notre Dame as compared to what it was at Wake Forest for Sam Hartman. Also, on a semi-underrated note, Wake Forest is only an hour from where he grew up, and Hartman even said that was the biggest difference for him. Now he rarely gets to see his family. Notre Dame is like a 14-hour drive from where he grew up, so he hasn't really seen his parents a lot. And look, I know he's an older dude, but I think we all can understand and appreciate it's nice to be close to home, especially if that's what you've been used to your entire life. I know for me, when I went to college, it was like a 4-hour drive away, and it was nice to be far, but it was also nice being able to know that I could go home at any time. But this is different. This is a 1-year deal for Sam Hartman. I think he's going to be able to handle the distance away from home. Now let's look at some of the similarities. Going to be honest, not a ton. If you look at Wake Forest and Notre Dame academically, they're pretty like-minded institutions in that way, although I'm not sure how much academics actually matter to Sam Hartman in his one last season of playing college football. He's not a degree-seeking student at Notre Dame, which means he's majoring in football. And by the way, that's fine. All right, this is a 1-year deal for Sam. He's already graduated from college. He does not need to be taking a bunch of classes this year when really the main thing he came to Notre Dame for was to, 1, win and try to compete for a national championship, and 2, up his NFL draft stock because it didn't look like he was going to be drafted if he had come out after this past season. They're also both pretty small schools. I looked it up, at least in terms of student population, because it looks like Wake Forest is about 9,000 undergrad students, and Notre Dame isn't far off from that with 8,874 in the last academic calendar year. Another thing, on the schedule, Hartman is used to playing ACC schools, and this year he gets to play against NC State, Duke, Louisville, Pitt, and Clemson. He had a lot of success at Wake Forest playing against ACC opponents, and that's a big reason why he's now the ACC career leader in touchdown passes. So that's going to be good, although I don't know if he's played a school like Ohio State yet in his career, and I don't know if he's played against a player like Caleb Williams. Even though they're not going to be on the field at the same time ever, he's going to have to go toe-to-toe with one of the best college football players of this generation, as much as that pains me to say, because anyone listening to this podcast knows how I feel about Caleb Williams. All right, we'll just leave it at that. Bottom line is they're going to be a lot more different than they are similar, but that's kind of the point, right? That's why Sam Hartman came to Notre Dame. He needs to do something different, something extraordinary, and he has a great opportunity to do that this season. All right, this next one comes from a longtime listener, longtime caller at Drew Brennan77, who gave us some over-unders on Jordan Botelho for the 2023 season. Let's go through them. Sacks, 9.5. I'm taking the under on this, but I think it's going to be close. 9.5 is a lot, all right? And I think that Jordan Botelho is probably going to split snaps a lot. I think there's going to be a lot of rotating on the defensive line. It's not going to be like Isaiah Foskey being on the field as much as he was, even though Isaiah Foskey did rotate a decent amount as well. So 9.5 sacks is a lot. I'm going to say the under. That's probably the safer bet, but I could definitely see a scenario where Botelho ends up getting over those 9.5 sacks. This next one, targeting calls, 2.5. I mean, for the love of God, I hope it's under. All right, what did J.D. Bertrand last year, or what did he have last year? Bertrand had 3 called on him, but luckily 1 got removed, and that was a ton, all right? That cannot be happening to a player who Notre Dame needs to produce like Jordan Botelho. They needed it from Bertrand last year, so that was a lot in the moment. So hopefully he gets the under. And honestly, look, I know the reputation around Botelho when he came into Notre Dame. It wasn't great. He was a bit of a loose cannon, even on the field. But he displayed some growth in that Clemson game last year. If you remember, he had the chance to absolutely annihilate a Clemson player on a blindside block, but he didn't. Okay, and it would have been a stupid play, and it would have cost Notre Dame the touchdown there, but he did not do it. So I'm hoping that he's able to carry that into this season. So it also applies to this next one. Kicked out of games, 1.5. Because I'm taking the under on the targeting calls, I am going to take the under out of the kicked out of games, although I could definitely see a scenario where he does get 1 targeting call and gets kicked out of 1 game. 1.5, hopefully, if it does happen, he's able to figure it out. Interceptions, 1.5. Under, he's a defensive end. Anytime a defensive end gets an interception, it's going to be rare, and he's not going to be dropping in coverage much. That would be a waste of his best skill set, which is getting after the passer. Personal fouls, 3.5. I did just say that he displayed growth, but he's probably going to get a couple of these throughout the year. Let's be honest. You can only contain him for so long. And some roughing the passers or personal fouls, some of them are such BS. So I thought about this one, but I'm going to take the under. I think he's going to get 3. Pump blocks, 1. I'm going to take the over. I think he had 2 last season. He definitely had at least 1. So I'm going to take the over this year, even though Notre Dame lost special teams coordinator and punt block savant Brian Mason to the NFL. And then this last one here, roughing the passer, 2.5. Even though getting a roughing the passer call is very easy, and you can get one even if you're not roughing the passer, really, I think he's going to be under. I think he's probably going to get 2. It happens sometimes, and he's going to be in the backfield a lot, hopefully. So there's probably going to be some calls where like, oh, is there a call? Is there a flag? Hopefully not. So I'm going to take the under. So I'm going to say under on sacks, under targeting, under interceptions, under on the kicked out of games and the personal fouls, over in the pump blocks, and then hopefully under on roughing the passer. But I think all of these are going to be pretty close. So good question from Drew Brennan, 77. Okay, we got a few more questions left. So coming up after this, I'm actually going to say something nice about South Bend. Seriously. All right, we just got a couple more questions left to get to. And this first one is actually a 2-parter. Comes from @voluntaryjoel41. 1, as a student or even after attending Notre Dame, did you have any game day rituals such as going to the grotto, have 5 beers, etc.? 2, without stating the obvious, in parentheses, bear sales in the stadium, what are some things that would enhance fan experience at a game? All right, I'll answer the first one. Do I have any game day rituals? I did when I was younger. When I was a kid, I watched College Game Day in full every Saturday morning. That was a staple of every Saturday. I loved that show. I loved being able to work on it a few years ago when I was at ESPN. And it's unfortunate what happened with them having to lose Pollock, and Lee Corso has probably only got a few more left on that show. So I always watched that, and then when I got to go to games when I was younger, I'd always walk around campus with my parents, and my dad and I would throw the football around all over campus. We didn't really go to a lot of tailgates because we just didn't really know that many other Notre Dame fans when I was growing up in Ohio, and then when I moved to Louisville, we just didn't really know that many. So I didn't really tailgate until I became a student. As a student, my rituals were just, I don't know, drink a lot of beer, I guess. When I was living off campus, we would have people over usually before the tailgates really got going, and then we'd head to the tailgate lots outside of the Joy Center in Notre Dame Stadium and just kind of bounce around to different family tailgates. Some of our friends' families put on some absolutely incredible tailgates, the McKeons, the Falkenbergs. You guys know who you are. Shout out to your tailgates. You guys always put on quite a party for everyone involved. So that was always fun, being able to bounce around and see my friends, see my parents from different dorms and all of that. But the main ritual that really started sort of later in my college career was Miller Lites on game day. And this was because my dad, whenever he'd come to games, he'd always bring a case of Miller Lite with him because, you know, when we were in college, we were drinking like natural lights, all the cheap stuff, but parents weren't really fond of that. So my dad would always bring Miller Lites, and then me and my friends would take his, and then it just became a thing. I think Notre Dame was on a winning streak in 2017, and we noticed that every Saturday when we're drinking Miller Lites, Notre Dame seems to win those games. Then it became a big thing with me and my friends. Miller Lites on game day. Hopefully, Miller Lite, if you're listening to this, sponsor the show, because if I got paid to drink Miller Lite, I think I would have made it, not just for my professional career, but just in life. And nowadays, I have to work like every Saturday, so I don't have any fun rituals to share. All right, part 2. this is a good question about what can Notre Dame do to make the fan experience better. And Luke Smith and I, my old co-host, we've actually been talking about doing a full podcast on this exact idea coming up here in the next few weeks before the season gets rolling here. Just a couple quick things, though. Notre Dame fired the stadium DJ Sticky Boots. He was terrible. That was a must to do to enhance the fan experience. I also love the light shows that they've been doing for night games. That's really cool. The band is always great. So I think overall, Notre Dame is doing a lot to improve the experience. It really just comes down to the ushers and the old fans. Like, the ushers need to stop pretending they're Secret Service and let people have some damn fun in the crowd. They should be focused on the idiots. And there's not that many of them at Notre Dame Stadium. Most of the fans are great, but there's always a few idiots who make a fool of themselves. The usher should be focused on them and not on stopping like little kids who are doing the push-ups in the crowd or stand in front of the old whiny alums. Like, the fact that the ushers spend so much of their time catering to those people, that alone really ruins the Notre Dame fan experience when you're at the games. And really, it comes down to those old whiny alums who are, the down in front type of people, the gold seats who are yelling anytime the crowd gets rowdy. Like, if that's how you're going to act, just get to the suites. They used to not have them. Now they do ever since the Campus Crossroads Project. So if that's how you're going to act, get to the seats, be in air conditioning, be coddled to, all that. All right, just get out of the stands so that the real fans can have some fun and play a role in helping the team win. So I've got more on this, but we're going to save it for the future episode. And this last one comes from my mother, who asks, rather than focus on the negative, what do you like about South Bend? And she says, beautiful Four Seasons, which I'll get to. Favorite place on campus and why? All right, and look, let me be clear. I obviously am not a big fan of South Bend, but I love Notre Dame's campus. My disdain for the city of South Bend is completely separate from my love for the Notre Dame campus. And by the way, Notre Dame feels this way too. That's why Notre Dame made the tri-campus community its own city inside of South Bend. That's why Notre Dame's address is Notre Dame, Indiana. It's not South Bend, Indiana. It's just located inside of South Bend. And I'll say I've been very fortunate to be able to go to a bunch of different campuses around the country, and I've seen a lot, but by far, Notre Dame is the prettiest, and it honestly doesn't make sense how such a beautiful place could be located where it is, but I digress. I'm going to be positive about South Bend. Actually, real quick, South Bend does not have 4 beautiful seasons. It has winter from like mid-October to May, and then it's hot and humid for 4 months. There's no such thing as spring, and then there's about a month of a gorgeous fall. All right, so that's going to be the thing I like most about South Bend. The fall, when it's hitting, the foliage is popping on campus, like that is the best time to be in South Bend, and the weather is usually pretty solid around that time of year too. So that is what I like about South Bend. I like the fall. I miss having a true fall. It's like the one thing I don't like about the weather in LA. I do kind of miss fall. All right, favorite place on campus and why? This one is kind of random. It's probably going to be different. I know a lot of people are going to say the Grotto, the Dome, all of that. My favorite place on campus is when you walk out of the library. Okay, so I think it'd be the east entrance exit. Either way, it's the one when if you walk out, if you're looking straight ahead to the stadium, it's on your right. All right, so you walk out that exit, and you can see the dome, you can see the fountain, you can see the basilica straight ahead, and then if you look to your left, you can see the stadium, and then right behind you is the library and Touchdown Jesus. You get to see all the major points on the campus that make it so great, that make it stand out, and it's just a really cool spot, especially when you're getting the sunset. It's usually right there, and it just makes the campus look so pretty. Honorable mentions, the lakes are great, going to the Grotto, all that stuff is great. I haven't been to campus in a really long time. It's been, nearly 2 years. I was at that Toledo game in 2021, and that was my favorite day in South Bend. Those of you who know what I'm talking about. But I'm going to be back on September 23rd for the Notre Dame-Ohio State game, and I cannot wait. I talked to my bosses at Fox about it, and it's looking really good. I've got my tickets. I'm going to be there. So hopefully, maybe we'll do some exciting stuff with the podcast around that time. But I cannot wait to get back on campus, but that is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Irish. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. Before you head out and get a head start on your weekend, remember to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the pod, and follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal Twitter account at Tyler, WOJCIAK. Enjoy the weekend, everybody, and I will see you early next week.